Okay, everybody, welcome back to another episode of the Accommodation Show. This week, I'm joined by the amazing, the wonderful Zeona McIntyre. Welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me.
It's such a pleasure. It's such a pleasure to meet new people. It's such a pleasure to meet people that we're connected with in the industry, but might not have talked to before, which is our case today. And it's such a pleasure to meet someone with such a fantastic story of growing up as an entrepreneur, or growing into entrepreneurship is maybe how I should put it. Um, Thank you so much for joining me.
Yeah, let's get into it.
Amazing. So, look, I think what I love to do before we start the actual kind of content and talking about it, because today we will be talking about the entrepreneurial journey, pivoting, changing, and obviously that word got overused during COVID. But when we got talking about doing this episode, we talked about our journeys and what we've had to do to be successful and how we keep it changing. And one of the things you said to me is, in 2 years' time, you're probably going to have to change again. But I think
Yep.
a good kickoff point would be to ask you to sort of introduce yourself to those that don't know you, and tell everybody about sort of where your journey became in the industry and where you're up to now.
Yeah, so I got into short-term rentals back in 2012. I think a lot of people don't know that they've been going on that long. But actually, Airbnb started in 2008, born out of the recession. So I thought I was a late adapter. Who knew? But now I think a lot of people got started probably in 2019, 2021. So I did get a head start. I got into it because a friend of mine in New York City, he told me about it and he said that he was going to quit his job and go travel the world, but he had this really expensive lease. He was renting an
Mhm.
apartment and he couldn't get out of it. So he said, I heard about this Airbnb thing. I think I'm just going to try it. And that 3-month vacation turned out to be an entire year that he got to just travel around because he could live off of this apartment that he
Mm,
didn't even own. And
mm,
so at the end of that year, he had made $50,000. And at that time, that was like a starting tech salary. I was like, holy cow, I've never seen that much money. I was in college. And I was like, okay, maybe there's something to this thing. I might try it. So I live in Boulder, Colorado. It is not New York City, and it wasn't quite
mm.
as busy here. But even with my slow start, I got to build, and it really became something great for me. But I started super simply. I started with a 2-bedroom apartment where I just rented out the other room. Luckily, it was already furnished, so I didn't really have to put any money into it. But that was enough to pay for the whole apartment. And so
Yeah.
from there, I really got to build. And I went out and got a second apartment and was living between a few rentals until I could afford to buy. So, yeah, it's really just like baby steps as you go and iterating until you find something that sticks.
Yeah. And I think that's the amazing part of it all. One of the things that I've noticed about what you've done is you've been building. So you set up a little bit of a foundation. You don't know exactly how it's going to look at the end. A lot of people talk about making a big plan and getting going, but when you're doing what you're doing, you're building. You've got a community that you've built on Instagram. You've written a book. You've been building and building these kind of foundations, which then enable you to progress as an entrepreneur and to make changes and pivots. So I might have got further into the episode than I wanted to already. but,
There's so much
but
more, though.
yeah, but I just it's one of those things, like you kind of what I'm getting at is you started off with picking up that first property, but as you've been going, you've been building and building, and that's how we've connected today. Was that conscious, or is it something that kind of you've learned along the way?
I really think I was just looking a couple steps ahead. It was really just like, what's the next thing? What's the next thing? I think nowadays I see people on TikTok where they went from, nothing to like 12 properties in 1 year. There's so much more that you can do if you're looking at what other people are doing. But you got to remember that back in 2012, like there was nobody talking about Airbnb. There were no books. There was no TikTok. There was no Instagram. So it was like I was really just trial and error. And I thought, this is just a little side gig. I'm going to go have a career in something else. I was studying to
Mm.
be a massage therapist at the time.
Ah,
And so I really didn't even think that this was something to do. It was just really like, let me make a little bit of money.
yeah, yeah. Wow.
Yeah.
Okay, so and then in that journey, so you picked up, so you started doing your own thing. All right, this is working, and then what was the next step after that?
Yeah, so I borrowed $4,000 from my dad and I went out and I rented another apartment because I wanted to scale somehow and I didn't quite have the money to buy anything. I live in a pretty expensive town, which I imagine you can relate to.
Yeah.
And so, what I love about Airbnb is that it can be like try until you buy, right? It can be like real estate training wheels because you can really just rent a room or even rent the room that you are in and go on vacation or go out for a camping
Mm.
trip or something and see if you like it. And then if you hate it, turn it all off and never do it again. But I love how it gives you that ability to kind of just use what you already have. So I had to go furnish another place. So I borrowed $4,000 from my dad. I don't even know how I stretched it that far, but that was enough for the first month's rent and deposit on the property, and then a little bit of furniture that I scrapped together. And so from there, I was just living out of a suitcase, going back and forth to whatever place wasn't rented at the time.
Oh wow. Oh wow, that's so cool. That's so cool. I guess it's like proper rather than working out of a garage on a tech product, you're actually sort of working in
Yeah.
hospitality, trying to build a business with the suitcase, going from one place to the other. I bet you at the time as well, it probably didn't even seem like a huge bother, right? Like I'm sure it was. There's a lot of work that you had to go into it, but
Yeah.
it was just was what you were doing, right?
Yeah, I was 26 and I felt like I could quit the job. I was working at a retail shop and I got to quit that job. And so it was like, sure, I'll clean these properties and sure, I'll just like deal with some discomfort. But it allowed me to have so much freedom. And I'm like, this is worth it.
Yeah, that's really cool. Um, I'm going to go back and I want to kind of finish out your journey, and then I want to go back and start kind of breaking down a little bit more about sort of those initial steps, and then we'll talk about the sort of the pivoting and the entrepreneurial sort of spirit that you gain, that you learn along the way, and things that some kind of those cornerstones or pillars that people need to be able to do what you've done and what I've done as well. But so you went to so you started so you had those first few properties. This is working, and then what happened next?
Yeah. So, I mean, I got kicked out of one of those properties. So, there's definitely some bumps along the way. But eventually, I was able to buy, and being able to buy a property really allowed me to actually take more of the income. And
Hmm.
from that point, I had just two one-bedroom apartments, one that I was renting, one that I bought, and I was able to become financially independent. I was making more money pretty passively. I mean, I was probably putting in 5 to 8 hours a week of work than I actually spent. And
Hmm.
so I was like, wow, this whole time I was trying to think of could I save up enough and put it all in the stock market and live off of my returns? And then I'm like, wow, just a couple Airbnbs and you can be completely free. So that
Yeah,
was really a light bulb moment for me.
amazing. And then I think you told me that you kind of got into a stage where you went to property management, sort of. You sort of scaled up, and that was your next sort of pivot, next move.
Yeah, I also wanted to keep building my portfolio. And because it was so expensive here, I started investing out of state as well. So at the same time that I was picking up co hosting properties here, I was also investing out of state. And as I learned how to manage properties out of state, out of necessity
Yeah.
for my own properties, I realized I can do this anywhere. And so in 2017, I started managing in 5 states or 5 countries because it didn't really matter. The time zones and the borders and all of that, it was all kind of the same.
Okay, gotcha. Awesome. Wow. And then so right, 20. So that was in 2017, or because obviously you started 2012 and then that was a 5 year run, and then
Yeah.
that was your main focus up until when?
The management piece?
Yes, yes.
Yeah, I think I kind of got tired of managing other people's places around 2018 or 2019. So I
Cool.
started it probably in 2015, and built it up to be 5 countries. And ultimately, I think we managed about 60 units. And then it was just me and an assistant. And I had a bunch of VAs that were doing some of the like online communication.
Yeah.
But I realized that management was the least enjoyable job. And maybe it's the personality type, and certain people would be really good at it.
Mm,
But I don't think that I was the best. And so I really focused on investing instead.
yeah. Yes, and then now you're helping with finance and investing, and you're a realtor as well. Tell me about the realtor thing as well, because I think this is a very important. I was actually talking to someone yesterday, and they said, I think that anyone that runs a short-term rental should be a licensed realtor. That's
Hmm.
their opinion. That it shouldn't be just sort of regular mums and dads. But then also, I mean, to run a hotel, you don't have to be you just have to buy the
Yeah.
hotel and you can run a hotel. So, but there's advantages of being a realtor, and obviously you made a conscious decision to get qualified.
Yeah. So for the longest time, I didn't want to be a realtor. And that was because, well, first, there's a lot of expense with being a realtor. You have to keep up with continuing education and all kinds of stuff. And then you're also held by a certain amount of rules. So it can be pretty restrictive to be a realtor.
Hmm.
So I only think it's worthwhile if you buy in the state that you live in, um, maybe twice a year or something, because you are getting a little bit of a discount. So that's
Hmm.
great. But other than that, no, I don't think it's worthwhile. The reason I became a realtor is because in 2020, I had 3 different transactions that I could have gotten a commission for because I referred somebody to a
Hmm.
realtor and then instead didn't. And I was like, wow, I think I left 60K on the table here. Maybe I
Oh,
should get a
interesting.
license. So since then, I've been selling real estate and I love it, but I don't think it's for everyone for sure.
Yeah. And then, but then also the finance side is actually obviously it's all within real estate, but it's actually a different branch altogether, right?
Yeah. So the creative financing that I specialize in, again, I think this is an entrepreneurial thing. It's like, I think that some people are wired to be entrepreneurs from birth, or it's a personality type. I'm not exactly sure, but
Hmm.
I remember slinging candy bars in grade school and selling, pictures of celebrities that I printed out on my home computer. I mean, I always was
Mm,
hustling something. And so it's
yeah.
natural to kind of have that in my blood now. And if I did the exact same thing every year, I would be so bored. So I think
Yeah.
that's kind of what happened in the management space and why I ultimately left it, because sales is a whole different dynamic. And now, on top of that, because interest rates are so high, I'm getting to get into this creative financing space, which opens up so much room for I mean, creativity, but just being able to create your own loans, it just
Hmm.
allows you to really like the sky's the limit, you know?
Yeah.
So
Wow.
I've really enjoyed that.
Yeah. Okay, so and that's look. So I think there's a few things I want to kind of go back and unpack that we've
Sure.
discussed along the way. Your journey is quite incredible. It's quite fun. Obviously, there's a certain amount of risk that you would have took along the way with each of those steps, and making change is difficult. But being an entrepreneur, you're probably most adept at making change. So when something like COVID comes along, you're like, okay, cool. Well, this is just business. We'll figure out what we're going to do next. But I think one of the first parts I do want to talk to you about is the getting going part. And I think I've heard it so many times. People just say, "Oh, you just have to get going. Just get going. Stop thinking about it. Just do it." And I think for a
Mm,
lot of people, that's like, "Oh, fantastic! I just want to do it." But it's like, do what? Do what? How
yeah.
do I go from like even like it's almost like you're telling people that all the solutions are out there and you already know, but it's not
Yeah.
easy to just do it unless you've got some sort of a strategy, some sort of a direction, some sort of an idea, something that you've looked at and went, all right, I'll give that a go. And you will know very well from selling whatever it was at school. I forgot what you said. I used to trade cards
Yeah.
at school, right? And I used to play Magic
Right.
the Gathering, and I would be trading cards and making money and building collections and that sort of thing. So that was always in my blood. But obviously, that wasn't going to be my way to make money. I used to play poker as well. I used to make, it's the entrepreneurial mindset of giving it a go.
Yeah.
What was your kind of giving it a go? I'm sure you didn't start off there. What are the different things you sort of tried?
Yeah, well, I mean, that's why I think just renting a room is so easy because for me, I already had sheets and towels and furniture, and all I had to do was create an Airbnb listing. Nowadays, I know it's a little harder because a lot of people are in an area where it's not allowed. Like, if you
Mm-hmm.
don't own the property and it's not your primary residence, maybe you can't legally rent. So, those kinds of restrictions have made it a little bit harder for people to get started. But I do think that if you are in a place where you can, even just getting in front of the computer, creating an Airbnb profile, and just going through the motions of that, that'll bring up a lot of questions for you of like, oh, do I want to clean or do I have somebody? Um, what time do I want people to come? How am I going to coordinate all these things? So I think people overwhelm themselves by making the steps too big, and you have to kind of break them down into smaller chunks.
Yeah, 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 absolutely. And I think I love that. I think that's a fantastic tip and a good way to think about it. I think that the getting going is it's not just it's taking affirmative steps towards an outcome, right? So, like you
Yeah.
said, register yourself. Do you have an Airbnb profile? Well, I do have one. I don't have one. Thinking about your different options in terms of uh, how you want to sort of get going, whether you want to rent out your room, whether you want to try to co-host, whether you want to do the arbitrage model. Like all of the information is to what the different models and options are. It's already out there, right? We don't need to teach people all of that again. But it's
Yeah.
just that whole getting going thing, which I think is really hard. And then we also don't really know whether we're going to enjoy it, right?
Absolutely. And co hosting, I think people don't realize that that's such an easy in. Because even in a town like Boulder, where we have a restriction that the only people that can short term rent are people that it's their primary residence. So you would think, okay, how am I going to start a short term rental business in this town? I wouldn't be able to do that because, I only have one primary residence that I can rent out.
Yeah.
But if you co host, you have unlimited, right? Because you just have different clients where it's their primary residence and they're going traveling or whatever, and you're renting out their property for them. So co hosting is great because you have really zero that you need to put down. If you go out and
Mm.
you arbitrage a place, you have to furnish it and you've got to have money for the rent. But co hosting, you can get in for nothing and make that host or the owner really pay for all the supplies to get going.
And I think you just proved one of the points that I was trying to make is that I had never even thought of co-hosting for someone that actually lives in the property. I'd always thought of
Yeah,
co-hosting as doing it for somebody's investment property, but the fact that they're living there, I'm like, how would you do that? I'm like, oh, actually, you could do it. Your pitch is a bit different to that particular
yeah,
owner, and just saying, hey, when you go away, next time you're going to go away, let me know, and I'll take care of all this stuff, so you don't have to, and you can focus on your holiday. And when you're away, I'll make sure that it's all taken care of and all the rest of it. So, and I never even thought of that until just now.
yeah.
And then you can create a business, right?
Absolutely. Business travelers are the best. The ones that are gone, a week, a month, or 2 weeks a month. Anyone who's traveling, maybe even 3 months a year, they'll go away for a longer summer vacation or something like that. Those can all be good clients.
Fantastic. So then, the other thing I wanted to talk to you about, because you've been through doing it yourself, managing other properties, making commission off of selling real estate, building an online community, writing a book. doing creative finance now. Finding your path and your calling and what you're good at and what you really enjoy is huge, very, very important, right? Like there's, I mean,
Yeah.
one could argue that, oh, well, you're changing and shifting because you're bored, and it's like, well, maybe not, because you're still working in the same industry, you're still taking the same skills that you've picked up along the way, but just sort of developing and maturing as an entrepreneur. That's kind of how I would see it, is that you're kind of maturing into it, but also I think that there's a huge advantage about learning about a specific industry in a specific space. And the reason why I call this the accommodation show is because we're hospitality, we're tourism, we're providing a service for people. And then where you fit into the industry is really up to you, whether it's short term rentals or hotels. And I would argue to the death that if you've been doing short term rentals and you've been managing them and you understand guests, you will have a great transition into hotels. There'll be different skills that you pick up, but you'll understand it. Same if you go from hotels back, and I see it all the time. The question I've got is this: when you're in the industry, quite often when you're listening to influencers or people saying you've got to go and do it this way, you've got to co-host and all of that, there are so many other opportunities in our industry that you can take up. Your one is finance, right? So you could get into financing properties and that sort of stuff. You could help people with managing their listings. You could set up a VA company. You could do what we do, which is a tech solution, which is building websites. You could build conferences for people to come to. There is just so many ancillary entrepreneurial opportunities that you have within this industry that you can get a hold of or take advantage of. Where, and you're quite familiar with this now that you've been in it. Did you see it that way? Do you agree with me, or do you see it a bit differently?
Yeah. I mean, I have never been one to do stuff by the book. I've always just kind of operated on my own path, which it sometimes in my life had been very frustrating. Like when I was managing properties here, why didn't I just manage them in Boulder where everything was a 5 minute drive from my house and I could just go to it? No, I had to be managing property in South Africa. Like, I'm like, that was stupid. Like where everything is so much more complicated than time difference and
Sure.
everything. So yeah, I've never been one to do it the easy way, but I also was able to find things that light me up, that excite me, that challenge me, that I feel really passionate and excited about. So
Hmm.
now, as a realtor, most realtors, they get in the car, they show clients around, they do it within, maybe a 20-mile radius. I sell real estate all over the US. I've got something under contract in Oklahoma, New York, and Tennessee while I live in Colorado. And because of the ability to do creative finance, I realized that I could sell anywhere. And it just allows me to have the freedom of doing it from my home and not having to waste a lot of time driving around. So I just think that people don't realize there's so many other ways to do something, and they get stuck thinking, okay, well, if I'm going to be a realtor, then I'll never go on vacation again because I have to be available and I have to be in town. And it just doesn't have to be like that.
But I absolutely agree, and I love it. But go back to the point from before. How do you figure it out? How do you figure out like what your options actually are without kind of being in it? And you're trying to get in it, but you don't know what your options are. So it's kind of chicken and the egg. And
Yeah.
I've got a suggested answer, but what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I think nowadays, because there's so much shown on the internet, it's great if you can find someone who's doing something that you want to do, because then you have a little bit of a path. You can see how they got there and then maybe have some ideas. The other thing that I say to people is just follow where your interests lie, right? So I didn't know 20 steps ahead. I didn't know I was going to write a book and do midterm rentals. I didn't know I was going to become a realtor years later. I literally just did the next step. And so I think people get a little bit too caught in their goals or these big ideas, and then they have no idea how to get from A to B.
Yeah. And then I think that emulating someone is fantastic. I think a lot of people get sort of hung up on that, like, I can't even approach them because we're competitors or whatever, and they don't realize on the scale of it, people actually help you to get going and get started with your
Yeah.
business. If you ask one person, they won't help you, but if you ask 100 people, one of them, will turn around and give you a bit of a
Yeah.
hand. You start to build up a bit of a network, and then you're effectively trying as well as and failing. I mean, you tried something in South Africa, right? Like now you're
Oh,
like
I
that was
fail all the time. You just have to fail faster, you know? You like figure it out and go like, whoop, not that. All right, here we go. But
yeah,
I'm failing all the time. And that's how I figure it out. It's like try 10 things, fail at 9 of them. And I
yeah,
think people just think that we succeed at everything and look at
yeah.
them and they're so great and so smart and so clever. It's like, no, I am walking through the fire and scared and courageous because I'm doing it anyway.
It kind of reminds me of a story of I think a bit of a philosopher teacher about the fact that if you don't take risks, you're not going to grow. And I think that those risks really help you to push yourself. And I love looking back at my journey, and I've seen this with a lot of entrepreneurs. I'm looking at their journey and just going, oh well, the first time you do something, it's incredibly scary, but then you progress and you grow, and it's not scary anymore after you've done it a few times and once you've kind of figured it out, right? Is that where you get
Yeah.
bored actually at that point? Are you like, oh, it's not risky anymore, I need to do something else?
Interesting. I don't know if I always get bored. I guess I just well, maybe I do. Yeah, I probably do get to a place that is too predictable. And I think I see opportunities. I'm a late adapter in so many things in technology and whatnot, but for some reason in real estate, I can kind of see something coming
Mm-hmm.
a year or two ahead, and then I'm like, oh, that's the next thing. Let me present this, or let me position myself, or learn everything I can about the subject so that I'm ready for it when it's time. So yeah, that's kind of the way I operate.
All right. So, what I like to do is just kind of wrap us up. So, about one last little bit, and that's the creative finance part.
Yeah.
That's sort of where you're at the moment, and that's where you see an opportunity because you were just talking about seeing things ahead of time, and obviously with finance, interest rates have gone up all across the world. House prices are still going up when they weren't meant to. So everything's a little bit crazy at the moment. But it's a space that you've identified as a good opportunity to work in. And I imagine that the reason why it's a good space is because you're really providing value to you're meeting a demand.
Yeah, in the US, 90% of mortgages are 3% or less, right? So it's hard for someone to stomach this 8% or 7% or 6.5% if they don't have to, right? Because that same house is almost going to be double the price. So, why I love creative finances is just giving a lot of people an opportunity to actually cash flow, right? Because a lot of short term rentals got hit after 2021, after COVID, when they were so busy and a million people got into it. Then there was so much
Mm-hmm.
competition and the prices going up. So we just kind of need some relief. So I was getting into creative finance to help investors find a way to get into properties easily and to cash flow. And one thing that is painfully aware to me right now, because I was recently filling out a loan application, is that for investors like me, I have 12 units, my husband has another 4, and we file our taxes together. It is a nightmare to try to get a loan the conventional way. When you do creative finance, they don't even check your credit, they don't
Yeah.
care. So it's
Yeah.
just very different.
Yeah, wow. And look, that's one thing which I think you've nailed it actually in terms of your journey and progression because even like the concept of creative finance in a lot of places in the world, it just doesn't exist in the same way that it does in the US, and I guess it's not as mature. On the flip side, I think that maybe in the US it got too creative around about 10 years ago, and then everyone got themselves into trouble. But it does also create some opportunities, right, of very rapid growth, and especially for people and for businesses if they do it correctly and they figure it out. So getting the right expertise is really important when you're looking at this sort of thing, I'd assume.
Yes, that's why I exist. People want the expertise, they come to me, right? So, and that's why I also sell short term rentals nationwide, because if I was focused only on short term rentals, like I told you, my town doesn't really allow it,
Mm,
right? So I had to think outside, and I focus on a lot of the markets where it's very popular. I don't know if you're familiar with Avery Carl, but she
yeah,
made short-term rentals very big, and her market is in, Podunk, Tennessee. But I sell a lot of properties there because so many short-term rentals exist in that market.
yeah, yeah. And then all the yeah, that makes complete sense. Look, I'm very aware that I could talk to you for probably an hour or 2 hours and keep this topic going. I'm going to put you under a little bit of pressure.
Ooh. It's how you make
If
diamonds.
yes, how do we? What would be your top three tips, entrepreneurial tips from your experience over the past 11, 12 years of doing this type of business?
Don't listen to anyone that's not doing what you want to do, because entrepreneurs are not met with a lot of support. Generally, friends, family will all think you're crazy for doing what you're doing. And that was very true for me when I was buying furniture from garage sales and putting it into an apartment I didn't live in. Like, that sounded crazy at the time, or welcoming strangers into my home.
Mm,
Airbnb wasn't always a normal concept, and people thought that was dangerous.
yeah, yeah,
So definitely, I would get around. This would be number two. I would say is find the community of people that will support you. So if you go to real estate investing meetups or short term rental meetups or conferences like yours that you're putting on, that is where you'll build a community of people that you can call up in the middle of the night and be like, "Am I crazy? Is this okay?"
yeah.
I have what I call like a board of directors. I have a few friends that I run crazy ideas by because they get me, right? So I think that's really important. And the third thing I'd say is like be super protective of what lights you up. So don't, I don't know how to quite tell people to do this, but if you find something that you're really excited about and that motivates you, something that you could work hours on, and then you would lose track of time, that's the sort of thing that will help you continue to find the next thing. And so I would really try to put energy into that and not let anyone dissuade you or let your day job kill that passion. Like, really try to hone whatever that is, because that's the clarity, is that feeling.
That's amazing. I love those three tips. I really do. Uh, they they would have come quite in handy at the start of my journey. A lot of those things I did know, but I always people give the advice, but it's like, how do I do it? What do I do? And I think that's what I really try to focus on with this. And I think that you're quite practical in the same way. Zeona, I want to thank you so much for taking your time out of your day to come on to the Accommodation Show, talk to everybody, share your entrepreneurial journey. I think it's quite
Mm,
inspiring. I'm
yeah.
looking forward to seeing how you grow over the next 5, 10 years, 20 years until we all go grey. I really appreciate you, and I appreciate the time that you've put into this. So thanks for coming on.
Thank you. Yeah.
And folks, if you are listening on Apple or on the Spotify, give us a review. If you're on the YouTube, then make sure that you like and you subscribe. Leave us some feedback. Put some comments below, and either of us will pick it up and answer your questions. Uh, what's the best way for people to get in touch with you and to keep following your journey?
Yeah, Instagram, I'd say. I answer all my DMs, so check me out there at Zeona McIntyre, just my full name.
Nice. Nice and easy. And I'll put everything in the show notes as well so that people can find it and reach out to you. Thank you so much. I wish you a fantastic rest of the day. And hopefully, I'll get to see you somewhere throughout the next year.
Yes, let's make it happen.
Take it easy. See ya.